Ukraine is claiming another small victory in its battle against the Russian invaders. President Zelensky saying tonight the country's forces have retaken Irpin, a city 30 miles from the capital Kyiv, that's been under heavy bombardment since the start of the war. As the humanitarian crisis deepens, an estimated 10,000 Holocaust survivors are experiencing the horrors of war and human cruelty again. Here's ABC.'s Matt Gutman, who spent weeks in the region on the urgent international efforts to save them.
In walkers and wheelchairs, they are helped into vans repurposed into ambulances. The bundles of what's most precious follow behind. In semi-clandestine missions nearly every day and often at night, dozens of survivors of the Nazi Holocaust are being spirited out of Ukraine.
We thought it was the last day of our life, as a matter of fact.
Inna Zharkovska's 80-year-old father, Valery, is one such Holocaust survivor. In early March, the family is one of thousands at the Kharkiv train station, desperately trying to flee.
But then my father fainted there in the crowd. He felt so bad that he couldn't survive there any longer. So there was a small room there, which was called like a medical service room. Yeah, and he was taken there, and we spent the night there.
They had no choice but to return to her father's apartment. They did their best to protect Ina's 8-year-old daughter.
She's probably seen such horrific things for someone so young.
She spent most of the days and nights being covered with blankets in the corner of the room, which we found to be the safest, right? Because the walls there are the thickest.
Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine, has been under nearly daily attacks since Russia invaded, with hundreds of civilians reportedly killed by Russian shelling, including a 96-year-old who lived through 4 different concentration camps during World War II, only to be killed last week. A fate Ina feared her father would share if he stayed behind.
He spoke about that, making us leave without him, but he can't look after himself. He would starve to death there.
The threat to Valery and an estimated 10,000 other Holocaust survivors in Ukraine comes as Putin uses Nazism to justify an invasion of their country, in part claiming that Ukraine is run by thugs and Nazis, even though Ukrainian President Zelensky is Jewish, whose relatives were murdered in the Holocaust. Putin's version of history is part of the motivation of many to help the Holocaust survivors who are finding themselves in the middle of a war zone yet again.
They are the history that should dictate the future. They're the moral compass.
10 time zones away in Los Angeles, Julia Enton got a call for help to get Ina and her family out of Ukraine.
What happened after you got that first call?
At first I panicked because I wasn't sure that I was up for the ask.
Julia grew up in Moscow during the Soviet Union. She now works as a paralegal, helping Holocaust survivors on reparations cases, inspired in part by her activist parents. Her volunteer work in Ukraine now looping her into a sprawling network of activists in Israel, Ukraine, England, and the US, all trying to help rescue efforts.
You have to create a certain level of trust because, again, you are thousands of miles away. And it is probably equally unreal to them that somebody thousands of miles away is going to help them with something that seems impossible.
Eventually, Julia connected with SafeBo, an organization spearheading evacuations in Ukraine and headed by LGBTQ activist Rain Dove.
We are now in the car, and all we're going to do is just drive over the border.
We have to find a driver who's willing to go and risk their lives to knock on a door to see if they can find them. It's a very chaotic process, but we are pioneers in an era of innovation that has never occurred. We have people like Julia, who doesn't even have to leave their bedroom and yet can personally guide a Holocaust survivor across the country and get resources for them every step of the way.
But sometimes these survivors, like Ina's father, are reluctant to leave.
He didn't want to leave his home, of course. He cried and kissed the front door. Literally kissed the front door. I would say that it's unbearable.
I asked Valery about that experience.
Why did he kiss the door when he left his apartment in Kharkiv?
He says because it's his motherland and because everything he loves is connected with it.
80 лет почти прожил.
He has lived there for 80 years and, well, it's very, very difficult to break this link.
These people managed to live through the first round of the unthinkable. That's why I think we owe it to them.
On March 13th, with the help of Julia and Rain, the family made it out. But just as Valery suffered years of trauma from the Holocaust, his granddaughter now also working through her own scars.
Is there a strange symmetry between what your daughter has experienced and what your father, as a Holocaust survivor, experienced?
Well, I believe that possibly her trauma is even worse than my father's at that time because he was very young. When we arrived in Warsaw, there was a loud bang in the city center with people just leisurely strolling around looking at the sights. She was absolutely sure that bombs were falling down because she was so used to hearing all that.
The family is now finally safe in a small town in Germany, Ina's daughter learning how to play again. Valery taking daily walks, aware of the irony of a Holocaust survivor seeking safety in Germany.
He cries all the time because it's too difficult for him to survive it the second time in his life, and he didn't expect that it would ever happen to him.
And over the weekend, this group landing in Israel. And every day, more of those survivors delivered to safety, offering tearful hugs of relief and those smiles of gratitude.